We're going to get started here today. Welcome to Studio 3B, located at NCSI headquarters in beautiful, bountiful Utah. It's a beautiful day out there today. Hopefully it's nice where you're at as well. We're going to be presenting our Grub Club webinar today on modern device management. As we proceed here, if you have questions, please feel free to enter those in the chat or in the Q&A sections, and we will be monitoring those and flagging Brian with those questions when he gets a break between his breaths. And I guess until then, we'll turn it over to NCSI CTO Brian Hodzik.
Okay, thanks everyone. So appreciate you joining today. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic in my opinion, and that is modern device management. Now, if you're a lot like me, you've heard this kind of story before. Modern device management, MDM. Wait a minute, I've heard that. That's mobile device management, right? We've had mobile device management around for many years now. You know, with the advent of usually the iPhone, even the BlackBerry Enterprise Server before that, the concept of managing our mobile devices is not really new. But this concept of modern device management, you've probably heard come up in the last couple of years. What is that, and what's kind of going on there? So the first thing that I thought was, oh, wait a minute, this is just the marketing department. The marketing department got a hold of this, and they understood, hey, this is a branding opportunity. Let's just change mobile to modern. But that's not quite exactly what's happening here. Let's break down kind of what's really going on behind the scenes. So the industry, of mobile devices has happened over time, and that was relatively straightforward. But Apple's a big driver behind this. So Apple is, they're the company that took away the headphone jack before we were ready to take away the headphone jack. This is a company that, a couple of years ago said, hey, we're not going to let you image your computers anymore. We want you to think of a laptop, or even by extension of that, a desktop, as the way that you would manage a mobile device in the past. And how was that? It shipped from the factory with the operating system already intact. You enrolled it into some kind of management system, and you didn't image it and put the operating system on it like we did in the past. And so now mobile device management didn't really apply anymore because it was just for phones and tablets and things like that. Now we're potentially doing it to desktops and laptops and things like that. So modern device management was not just a rebranding of mobile device management, but really an extension of that to go to other things like desktops and laptops, Windows 10, Mac devices that maybe you didn't think of before. But you've probably heard some other talk out there, some other discussions about things like co-management. What is co-management? What does that really mean? And how does that fit into modern device management, mobile device management, and traditional, all this kind of a big mush. So let's kind of break that down a little bit. Let's talk about our traditional device management. So, a lot of our customers, and, I've been a specialist in things like Endpoint Manager or SCCM. These are traditional systems to manage our devices. What would they do? They do things like inventory. They probably do things like remote control. I bet they patch. Other things like push out software. And then we go through imaging. These are the things that we've been doing for years now. Nothing should really be a surprise to anyone right here because it's been part of the ecosystem, part of the process, this entire time. But then what brought to the table with our MDM platforms, even if it was just from a iPhone and Android style management? Inventory, well, sure, we got inventory. That's part of the process when you enroll it. What about things like remote control? Well, kinda, sorta, a little bit, but not really. It's not really there. What about things like patch? Let's say patch. Same kind of thing. Is there a patch management inside of MDM? Well, sort of, not really. It depends on what kind of device and who the manufacturer is. Pushing out software, we usually have that. We have a fancier name for it now, right? Apps. The ability to control what apps get installed on that particular machine. And things like imaging. Well, again, we talked about how we don't put the operating system on there. Somebody else puts the operating system on there, and we just configure it. So we don't image them, we enroll them. We enroll the devices into our management ecosystem. Now, if you look at it, you kind of say, well, wait a minute, I'm missing a couple of things. There's some gaps in here. What about other things? Group policy. We're so used to things like group policy to be able to configure the way that machine works. Group policy doesn't exist over here. We have this thing called a CSP. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's not really group policy. It's not exactly a carryover. So we have some gaps over here, especially when we get out of iOS and Android. iOS and Android, we didn't need things necessarily like patch. The system kind of updated itself and the apps updated themselves a lot easier than we did on other systems. But we're missing remote control. We're missing the way that some of this other software works. So kind of the concept out there was, why don't we do something called co-management? And co-management was having both a traditional and a modern device management system at the same time. That way you're not saying, well, I'm going to throw away this old model and I'm exclusively going to use the new model, or I'm not going to move to the new model. It's a hybrid co-management. I'm going to be able to do it with both new and old. So that's kind of the concepts we have behind our co-management system. So you're going to hear a lot of different terms thrown out there. Hopefully that helps you understand more about our traditional, our new modern device management. Remember, it's more than just a rebranding of mobile. It adds extra functionality around things like Windows 10 and Mac OS. Co-management is having both of them, because we probably need both for the time being until we can get patch, remote control, and all of the way that we did group policy brought over into our modern. We're going to need both of them. So in the Ivanti portfolio, we're talking about that today. We've had this traditional management for a long time, our endpoint manager. This new modern device management is coming to us from the Mobileiron family of products. So Mobileiron was acquired by Ivanti last year, and it is now integrated into the ecosystem. We're going to kind of talk about how that works and some of the integration a little bit later. But this is how we're going to achieve this particular goal. We're going to talk about these CSPs and how these CSPs are a quasi replacement for GPOs and help you configure the way that you interact with those systems. Okay, so let's actually go over here and jump into a console demonstration so you can kind of see exactly what it looks like. So here I am. I'm logged into, no, I'm not logged into it. Kick me out. Let me log into it really quick. I'm going to log into our Mobileiron management console and walk you through some of the different configurations and items that we have in here. So first of all, we got some cool dashboards up here at the top that break it down based on the different kinds of devices and models and manufacturers and things like that. Up here you can see we support all the major manufacturers from Windows to iOS to Android to Mac OS. All of those are encompassed in the new modern device management process. So you can have all of them exist inside of this ecosystem. If I go here and click on devices, I can have a listing of all of my different devices. If they're phones, I can actually have phone numbers associated with them. If I go click on an individual device, it's going to give me more information specifically about it. Here's that inventory information that we kind of talked about that is important and exists in both modern and traditional. But then we can go to these configurations. We're going to talk about these a little bit later, but these are the configurations that have been applied or are applicable to this particular machine. What applications are installed, what applications are available to it, other policies and certificates and things like that. Up here at the top, I can assign it to people, send messages, I can lock it and unlock it, I can force it to check in. All of this communication happens through the manufacturer's cloud system. So that is either Microsoft or Apple or Google. They have a ecosystem to be able to, for example, send out a lock command. For example, Apple does the APNS network, their Apple Push Notification Network. So as long as it's connected to the internet, it'll receive that signal, right away. Other actions you can do in here, things like, restarting the device or scheduling updates, things like that. You're going to get into this really difficult problem that not all vendors, and even worse than that, not all systems inside of those vendors are created equal. A lot of people say, oh, look at that, a scheduled iOS update. That's really cool. Let's go and run that on this particular machine. Well, you're going to notice right here, it gives me a reason that we cannot do that. This device is not under supervision. So every manufacturer does it different. Apple does it different from Microsoft. It does it different from Google. But then also there's sub-components to that certain features, an example of that is scheduling an iOS update. This does not work on, for example, a BYOD device, where this is a user's device, this is their personal device, and they've just enrolled it into our ecosystem. We're not able to do that. Only when it's supervised and it is brought to us through the Apple supervision system, and that's things like DEP, would I be able to schedule that. So not all functions apply to all different devices. So that's something you're going to kind of have to get used to in the modern device management, is that not every device is created equal. Okay, so there I have all my different devices. I can also go look at it from a user's perspective. If I go click on a user here, I can see the different devices. This particular user apparently has a lot of devices out there, but I can look at it from a user view or from a device view. And then if I wanted to go jump into that individual device, it would happen there. Okay, let's talk about those configurations. We brought up that the CSP. What was a CSP? What does that mean? That's actually a Microsoft term for, I think it's cloud security provider or something like that. But the concept is it is a configuration of that operating system. So here in the configurations, you can see over on the left, I've got different filters for Mac, iOS, Android, and Windows 10. Those are the major operating systems that we're going to support. Notice things like Windows 7 are not in here. It's only modern operating systems, and it's not every operating system. These are the four that we're going to support. Android's a little bit weirder because there is a huge factionalism inside of Android of all different varieties of it. But for the most part, if it's still mostly Android, it is supported.
Hey, Brian.
If I go over here and click add on it, I can go through and add a different configuration. Here's a bunch of example configurations that I have. Over here on the side, I can filter them. I can say, well, show me just the iOS or just the Android or just the Windows. And down at the bottom, it shows you the different ones. Like doing certificate stuff works on every platform, but content caching only works on Mac. It doesn't even work on the other Apple platform, iOS. It's exclusively Mac. Over here, you can talk about different versions. They add versions, they add functionality as versions come out. So it doesn't necessarily work on older systems. Maybe you have a bunch of Android 4. Maybe it's not going to work if there's a brand new fancy version that just came out and it's got some new widget in it. It may not include in the older versions. So you can kind of turn on the different filters, turn on that iOS supervised version over there as well. So you can scroll through here and you can say, okay, what do we want to do? What are we going to try and configure? First, if you come from the world of Microsoft, you're used to having group policies that can do practically anything. I mean, open up the group policy console. How many items are in there? There's 47,000 things in there. You can add in ADMX templates. There is a lot. It's not necessarily good that there's a lot. Sometimes you're going to drown in it. But it's definitely something that you feel like you have lots of flexibility. Here's the number of CSPs that we have, and that's kind of it. It gets added to and changed over time, but they're not thousands and thousands of them. It's more like, hundreds of them. So if I want to go in here and it's like, for example, I want to do a passcode. A passcode is a pretty generic one. It works on most platforms. You can say, oh, yes, I do want to require a passcode. I'm going to say require passcode, and I want the passcode length to be, 16 digits. I hate my users. I'm going to allow them to do simple. And then you can see, again, the different configurations that we can do, but they're not the same. Windows 10 decided to be different from iOS, and so it's not necessarily exactly the same. And Mac OS has a specific one that they can enforce the passcode rule at the next logon, but that's a Mac OS one. But the beauty of it is we're going to combine all of them together. Here's all the standard ones across all the platforms. Here's the Mac OS ones. Here's the Android ones. We're going to bring it all together. Now you don't feel like you're managing in an island. They all exist right there in the same console. Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, all right here. So I would just go through and configure the different settings that I want to. Who do I want it to apply to? It's going to be applied to all of my devices, certain users, et cetera. And then those were those configurations when you saw back when I looked at an individual device. This is how this particular device is configured. They have my identity certificate there and my passcode config. And, you're probably going to end up having multiple of these configurations. And then you just apply it to the machines that you want to. So as we keep scrolling through here, you can see other things. We can turn on a VPN. We can do iOS restrictions. And then we got some cool other things like the ability to do our Mobileiron tunnel or our per app VPN. Maybe we want to have an application that just that application VPNs back in and nothing else, not the system as a whole. Or we want to do something like our Mobileiron Bridge. Remember when we talked about how we probably need to have both of these systems? The Mobileiron Bridge is really cool because it gives us the ability to bridge the gap between traditional MDM systems and systems that are the traditional kind. So like Endpoint Manager, for example, you can actually go and create a bridge configuration and then install another agent, and that's a good segue over here to talk about our applications. So here under apps, you can see all the different apps that I have available to me. When I go and add them, I can add them in many different ways. Up here at the top, I could get it from the iOS store, the macOS store, Google Play, Windows Store, or some kind of like in-house application. We have our own applications to get delivered as part of the platform for things like, a secure email that you can configure that's independent from the system email if you want to control that, or tunneling applications. Down here is our Mobileiron Bridge. Again, that's the one that we talked about that can do traditional stuff as well. Here's some examples. Well, actually, let's go through here and add one. If we want to type up here at the top, I need to come up with a better example other than Angry Birds, but that's just my still go-to. I'm sure the kids out there like some new app. Oh, what about things like TikTok? Isn't that what the kids do and talk about these days? So here I can say, I want to push out this particular application from the iOS store. I would just go through the process and say, okay, who's going to receive it? Is it internal versus external? And how is that going to show up? So I have all my different applications that I've configured here. Some of them are delivered to us by the manufacturer, my Angry Birds up here at the top. But then down here at the bottom, these are my specific ones. Like here's my Endpoint Manager agent, or here's my Neurons agent. So that's using that bridge software, the Mobileiron Bridge, to be able to install traditional app, just like an exe or a batch file or something like that on a traditional machine. So all these applications and all these configurations you're going to create on your side. And then when you're ready, you actually just enroll the device, and the device can now see these applications. So here's my mobile device. I've just got an iPhone here. And what you do is after you enroll it, on iOS, it's pretty straightforward. If you haven't ever enrolled an MDM device before, there's actually this just device management section right here that you have the ability to install, and that's how we get our device management. So you just go to a website, log in, and it installs that profile. With Android, you go and get an app, and that's how we do it from an enrollment perspective. But after it's enrolled, you can see here, I have my Mobileiron applications, but I also have the Virtrillo. Virtrillo is just my fake company I used to show off these technologies. So here's my Virtrillo apps. And these are all the applications that are made available to me. If I click back here, I can say whether they are automatically installed, whether the user picks them, whether it shows up here at the top. The user could, install all the applications if they wanted to. We can do updates and so forth through there. So I've actually delivered these applications like our email configuration here, or our Mobileiron Go that checks to make sure that we're still happy and healthy. And even that Angry Birds application, I delivered via our own version of the App Store. The things like the password management and all those configurations on the back end, they're just invisible. The user doesn't see anything with that. They just know that it doesn't it forces them to have a password and things like that. Okay, so that was a quick run through of the basic functionality of our Mobileiron platform. I'm going to pause for a second and take a couple of questions here. We've had some come in before I jump into our next topic, where we're going to talk about things like Windows Autopilot. So one question, is this for all versions of Windows 10? The short answer is, generally speaking, yes. I need to find out if it actually works on Windows 10 Home, or if they've extracted that out. But all of the major builds of Windows 10 that are still supported are there. So I'm going to make a note to see if it actually works on the Windows Home version or not. But all the other versions, yes, it does. And what kind of features and functionality are you going to get around things like locking and wiping on Windows 10 devices? Absolutely. So Windows 10 device enrolled in the modern device management system, you can lock and you can wipe, just like you can a iOS or Android device. Is there Mobileiron for Linux? No, unfortunately not. Android's an offshoot of Linux, but the actual application isn't there for fat installed Linux. Ubuntu or Debian or whatever. I haven't heard a huge use case for that. I haven't had a lot of customers asking me for that. If you can come up with a really good use case, maybe there's something to be said there. And then another question, is this included in the Ivanti Enterprise Agreement, the ELA? That's a complicated question. The short answer is probably not if you purchased the ELA in the past. The more complicated answer is in the future, it may be included. Whether you are grandfathered in or not is up for debate. So let's take that offline and have a one-on-one with you, and let's look through your EA and how it was exactly written. But I can pretty safely say the answer is probably no, you cannot. Okay, let's jump back over and keep those questions coming. I can answer them kind of as we go along here. Let's talk about Autopilot. So Autopilot is a really cool technology, and it gets all mushed up in this modern device management. And sometimes it's hard to understand what is the difference between modern device management and Autopilot and what kind of that means and the whole thing. So let's talk about a device. What was the life cycle like of your devices traditionally? I'm going to kind of draw up a circle here really quick. We would usually image that device, and we would put our apps and our configs on it, and then we would hand it over to the user. The user would use it and consume it, and they would potentially give it back to us, and we would re-image it. But reality, there's more than that. You know, we have the disposal life cycle. Those of us that have talked about, that you've heard more about our asset management, you know about, hey, disposal and fiscal assignment's a big thing, as well as, you know, how we get into this ecosystem. We have to purchase it. We have to purchase this device before it gets into the ecosystem. So asset management is an entire other topic. I think we've done other webinars on it. If you have any questions about that, we'd be happy to tell you more about it. But this is kind of what we would focus on traditionally. I get a piece of hardware in, I go and image it, I put my apps and configs on it, and then I go hand it out to my user. Well, in the new style world, imaging is going away. You know, it's not dead yet, but it's certainly being shown the door that Apple doesn't let you image anymore. In 10.14, they killed that. What are we going to do? How are we going to handle that? I envision a future that Microsoft is going to do the same thing, where they're not going to let us image anymore, and they're going to want it, you know, as part of the, you know, a chip in the machine as it goes out the door. So we need to go through that process called enrollment. We talked about how you would enroll those devices into our modern device management system. So they need to be enrolled. Let's jump over really quick and show you what enrollment looks like. Let's talk about Windows 10 enrollment, because I think it's the most questionable thing, and it's a little bit of a difficult concept to understand. Here I have a Windows 10 machine. I've opened up the settings, and I've opened the Access Work or School section, and I have an option here to say Connect. What that means when you say Connect is I want to enroll it in a couple of different things. Mostly, I want to enroll it in Azure Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory is a big part of this equation. We can't ignore Azure Active Directory because a lot of what we're doing here requires some level of Azure Active Directory. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's what this concept is. So that's enrollment. That's interesting, but that's me kind of up here at that time enrolling it. I've already got the machine ready. Maybe I've even put some apps on it. It's just before I hand it to the user. So what is this autopilot concept? Well, if we go back to the purchase, when we actually buy this piece of equipment, we can actually interject and do something. And what we can do is at this phase right here, we can turn on autopilot. What we're going to do is we're going to put into a Microsoft database some interesting components. We're going to put in the hardware hash, and the serial number. Serial number is not quite unique enough for us in this world, so we have to compute a hardware hash, and I'll show you what that looks like. But if we're doing it at the time of purchase, we can actually have the manufacturer do that for us. They can compute the hardware hash and get the serial number, and they can upload it so that when the process happens of Azure Active Directory enrollment, at this stage, we can actually have it shoot off and go talk to our MDM system. So we're actually doing that all before the machine is actually plugged in. So I'm going to walk you through what this process looks like. You can do it by hand. I could go right here and say enroll. That's okay. That's fine. But it's a little bit tedious. I've got to get the machine up and going. I got to install it. I've got to what? Put a local user on it or something like that. And then I've got to do the enrollment process. What Autopilot is it's hijacking this first phase of the system and going through an automatic enrollment process. So let me show you what that exactly looks like. Now, you've got to look really close or you're going to miss it. If you blink, you're going to miss this. The entire concept of Autopilot is during the setup process. Normally, if you've done Windows 10 setup before, you've seen this a million times. It's going to ask for me for the keyboard layout. It's going to ask a couple of other small trivia questions, and then it's going to say, okay, who is this for? What is the user account? At that point, you're doing domain joining or you're creating a local account. You're going through that exact process at that point. If Autopilot is enabled, what happens? Now, you don't enable Autopilot. You get the hardware hash and serial number and you tell Microsoft about it. Watch what happens when we skip this keyboard configuration. Normally what's going to happen is it jumps to ask what the user information is. Autopilot just happened right there. I mean, it was right there in that second. That was the entirety of Autopilot. I hope you didn't blink. If not, we're going to have to rewind the recording and go back to that. What happened was Windows setup said, I'm going to look at the serial number of the hardware hash. I'm going to call out to Microsoft and say, Microsoft, does anyone claim ownership to this serial number and hardware hash? If they do claim ownership to it, do I need to enroll them in Azure Active Directory? And if so, do they have a mobile device or a modern device management system that I should enroll this particular device into? All of that happened in a blink of an eye. And look at what happened. Remember, Virtualo, this is my fake company, but look, I've customized it. Welcome to Virtualo. Put in your email address. I've put my acceptable use policy down here at the bottom. If I would go through and log in, I am a regular old-fashioned user. I'm not an administrator in this example. I don't know what this means. I don't know what enrollment is. I don't know what Autopilot is. I'm just a regular old-fashioned user. I have Okta set up to my demo system, so we're just going to authenticate. We're going to authenticate to Okta, if we can type the password in right. And what's happening now is that went through the entire Azure Active Directory enrollment process, through the modern device management enrollment process, all from the user's perspective, and away we went. So think about what we could do here. As that goes and enrolls, we'll come back to that in a minute, but if I did it at the time of the purchase, the enrollment has now happened with a regular end user. I can now apply those apps and CSPs that you saw earlier. I can even do the modern device or the Mobileiron Bridge to put, like, for example, an EPM agent on it. And I've given it to the user. What could I theoretically do with this? I could ship my hardware directly to the end user. Heck, these days, that's not a fantasy anymore. Days of COVID have proved that this is only going to happen more and more in the future. So I could have easily picked up this equipment, drop shipped it directly to the user, and they enrolled it themselves, and they went through this entire life cycle. So that's the really cool part of Autopilot. And since it's dedicated to the serial number of the hardware hash, what if they have to go through like the PC reset settings, or they get a new hard drive, or they reinstall something like that? This process will kick in again. It doesn't exclusively exist the first time. It's not like sysprep that, oh, once it's out of the box, you got to unsysprep it or anything like that. It doesn't work that way. It hijacks Windows 10 setup at that phase after that keyboard layout, and it essentially hijacked it and ran through the enrollment process at that point. So that's what Autopilot is. I think it's a really cool technology. And I think you're going to be using it a lot more in the future. So notice that it's now going through its process. We're going to come back to this in a minute, but we'll see that it installed some different applications and got the machine configured and ready to go. So it's kind of off and doing its thing. Let's talk about some of the back-end process of how this worked. First of all, we need to talk about licensing. We can't get away from the Microsoft tax, right? We have to pay Microsoft for this, for the pleasure of using this particular service. So here we have the Windows Autopilot licensing requirements. The bottom line is you need a level of Azure Active Directory that is probably not the free version. If you say, hey, we've got it for free as part of Office 365, you may not have what you want. So here's a guide that describes what it is. This is just, you can just Google for Autopilot licensing requirements right on Microsoft's website. So you can see if you have an E3 or E5, or if you have Azure Active Directory P1 or P2, or Intune, or any one of these will give you the ability to enable that. How you turn it on is you go to something called the Microsoft Store for Business. This was something that was obscure. I'd never even heard about this until about a year ago. But this is I don't know, not exactly an app store or a configuration. It's some kind of place that's outside of the traditional things that you probably logged into. It's not Azure Active Directory. It's not your Office 365 portal. This is another place called the Microsoft Store for Business. Once you log in and you go down here to devices, here are those devices. Remember how I talked about the serial number? Here's all the serial numbers for those devices that I've added. Now, I've added these by hand. I'll show you how to do that. But if you bought them from the manufacturer, it would show up there under OEM. Oh, whoops, it looks like it logged us out. But all of our devices show up here. We just say, hey, I want to have a particular auto deployment or autopilot deployment configuration. And if you wanted to open these up, you could see exactly how those configurations work and what they're going to do. Maybe you want to edit the profile here and you want to say, hey, let's say what the process is when they log in. Here's our sales ops computers. Should they skip the privacy settings? Should we disable the local account on creation? Should we skip the EULA? You can just choose these different options that would happen as part of that autopilot process. However, we need to go one step further than that. We need to do the modern device management enrollment. How do we do that? Well, we go to our Azure Active Directory. So here I am logged into Azure Active Directory. I need to know my tenant ID a little bit later. That's where that tenant information shows up. But if you scroll down here, you can go to Mobility, MDM and MAM. You can see that I have a connection, in this case, to my Mobileiron cloud. This is how it knew to find Mobileiron during that enrollment process. It found it via this URL. So we've kind of now married the two together. We've married Azure Active Directory over to our MDM system. So we talked about that serial number or hardware hash. How do we get that? Where does that come from, et cetera? Let's say I'm buying hardware. Here I am on Dell's website. I want to buy an Optiplex 3080. Great, this looks amazing. That's exactly what I wanted to. I'm going to tweak it however I want. Look at this down here. Autopilot, no Windows Autopilot. I can turn on Autopilot. They're great and don't actually charge us for it. It's going to ask for that tenant ID. Do you remember our tenant ID when we were back here in Azure Active Directory? There is my tenant ID. So I would copy that. I'd come over here and I would paste it in and I would say Virtrillo.com. Now this machine at the factory, they are going to run the serial number and the hardware hash, and they're going to automatically upload it to Microsoft, and it's going to automatically show up in the devices here under OEM. And then I could just choose to have like the default deployment profile apply to them, or I can apply a different deployment profile. So now I could drop ship this machine directly to the end user. They would just enroll with their regular end user account, and they would get up and going. I don't only have to do this backwards, or excuse me, forwards going. I can go backwards in time. So there's actually a PowerShell command that I can run on a machine. I can just open it up right here. If you just Google how to get the hardware hash, this will just be on Microsoft's website. It's just a couple of lines of PowerShell. And what it's going to do is it's going to calculate that hardware hash and then spit it out into a file. In this case, it just spits it out into a CSV file. Here is the device serial number, the product ID, and the hardware hash. And it's this big, long, funky number there. What you're going to do now is go back over to the business store, and you are going to add those devices, and it's going to ask for a CSV file. You would have thought you could just add them by hand or add just the serial number, but no, when it's asking for that CSV, what it's asking for is that utility that spit out the devices there. I found some ways that you can automate that, where people have automatically generated that across all of their machines. That way you could take your existing fleet of thousands of machines, get the serial number, the hardware hash, put it in there, so that if you ever wipe those machines or they restart or something like that, they could go through and enroll in this particular process. So that's kind of how it works. It's a combination of Windows setup, Azure Active Directory, the Microsoft Store for Business, our modern device management. They all kind of come together in a happy little marriage to arrive at this exact sample right here, that now I have that machine, it went through Windows setup, but the user is already, the user was able to do it on their own. It's going to take a minute here. We'll see if some of the applications are coming down. That right there, that's a Mobileiron application, but here in a minute it's going to synchronize, and it's actually going to bring down, in my case, the Avanti Endpoint Manager agent. It's going to install the Neurons agent. It's going to go through that entire process, as well as the CSPs are going to be configured. Like one of my examples of that is I've turned off the ability to use Windows Hello. I've gone and disabled that, so you can see, hey, that option is disabled, even though it's turned on by default in Windows 10. Okay, so that was a quick run through of what Autopilot is. It's one of my favorite kind of features of the system. It takes a little bit of work to set up. It's not that much, and it requires the Azure Active Directory and some of that preparation, but it's really cool from there. Okay, so let's go to our questions here. We've got a question kind of that was more about the previous section. Do all the Mobileiron deployed apps install in the company folder, or can they appear on the home screen? They can absolutely appear on the home screen. So those applications that I installed, remember my silly example of Angry Birds was delivered to me from the corporate perspective. They show up right here on the home screen. So the Email Plus, the Mobileiron Go, and Angry Birds all were delivered through the Virtualo application here. If I were to go and install this Okta Verify application as an example, it would go and land on the home screen. So we can have it be a much more seamless experience for the end user, that they're going to see it just like other applications. Okay, next question. For Autopilot, understand we need Azure Active Directory. Do we need Intune also? Let's answer that really quick. Answer is no. Intune is essentially a direct competitor to Mobileiron. So you do not need Intune. It is a separate modern device management system, and you do not need it. So Azure Active Directory is what you need, but you do not need Intune as part of this setup. Do we need Mobileiron for Autopilot in the case where we also have Avanti EPM? The short answer is no. Avanti EPM has its own version of modern device management that you can use Autopilot with as well. I think it's not quite as fleshed out and refined as it is in Mobileiron, but yes, you can use Autopilot with EPM. It would go through that same kind of process. In the case where we have Mobileiron and Avanti EPM, should we use Mobileiron for the enrollment? Absolutely. It's much more well refined and works a lot better. So I would definitely steer you towards the Mobileiron side of the house. Next, do we need Azure Active Directory for just the devices, or do we need our users in Azure Active Directory as well? That's kind of complicated. They need to authenticate against Azure Active Directory. Remember, as part of that setup, I had to type in my username and password to get in. If I couldn't authenticate, we're going to have a bit of a problem there where they can't actually log in and the user can't do it. So essentially, yes, the user has to belong inside of Azure Active Directory. You can have regular Active Directory just sync up to it. That's how I have my example here. If we went and looked at my Azure, I have a connector that makes it so that it synchronizes all these users from my on-premise version up to Azure Active Directory. And since you're paying for the license anyway to get it, you're usually paying a user license, not necessarily even a device license associated with that. Lastly, will Autopilot also join my domain? Short answer, yes. Long answer, you're joining an Azure Active Directory domain, not a local on-premise domain. And so there is some distinction between the two there. But technically, after we get up and going, so here's my machine. It's kind of landed. It's enrolled. This is just connecting across the internet. It hasn't connected to anything on-premise. But inside of Endpoint Manager or inside of Neurons, or sorry, not Neurons, but Mobileiron, you could have it run an action to join a domain. It's probably not necessary because we probably joined Azure Active Directory as part of that. More than probably, we kind of have to. So there would be no need to go and join that domain. If we were going here and say, let's connect to our school. Do you remember how we talked about doing this by hand? You can see it has already been completed. That step is done, and it was done by our regular end user that did it. So it is in the domain. It's just the Azure Active Directory domain version of it. Someone said we have Okta. Is it the same? I don't know exactly that question. Maybe you need to refine that, but Okta just provides our authentication inside of it for things like, maybe I wanted to multi-factor authenticate them or something like that. We can use Okta or Ping or other identity providers, but they're not required. If you just want to use the authentication built right into Azure and Azure Active Directory, great, you can just use that. It is by no means required. We're just an Okta reseller. I like to talk to customers about it, so I've integrated mine to show you could have had more security there. I could have had it buzz a phone or something like that. I did ask a security question, but that was it. Next, do you really need any kind of local accounts, admin or otherwise, anymore after modern device management is set up this way? Great question. That's complicated. Short answer, no, you don't, because everything's enrolled here. If I want to go and change a configuration, oh, whoops, it logged me out again. I don't need to log into that machine in order to do it. If I want to wipe that machine, or I want to be able to change what's installed or change the way that the, I don't know, the email works or their VPN or content filter, any of these kinds of things. If I want to change these functions, I can do it now through the CSP. I don't necessarily have to get on that machine locally and do it. If it's always authenticated and always on the internet, most of our devices are these days, another user could go and log onto that. That's fine. I could log off here and then go log on as a different user. As long as I have an internet connection, I'll authenticate against Active Directory and away I go. There's some weird use cases where if we're not connecting to the internet anymore, we don't have cache credentials here. We don't know what the local admin is. You may run into some weird problems there. As we were looking at the autopilot configuration here, you can actually change the way that works. Remember, you actually have an option to say, should we disable the local admin account creation on the device? It is your choice. You may want to disable it. You may want to enable it. It's up to you to configure exactly how that works. Okay, licensed by user or device or by both. Most of our users will have a company phone. The short answer is it is based on the user. So that way we can have multiple devices. That way if you have, think about it now, especially it's not mobile anymore. It's not just how many phones that they have. They have a laptop and they have a phone. That's 2 devices. So most licensing models focus on the user. That way if they have a phone, a laptop, and a tablet, we're not going to ding them 3 times. It's just a one time for the user. An Okta question regarding the users able to log into the domain. Does Okta facilitate that connection rather than have the users in Azure Active Directory? Generally speaking, yes. They are going to authenticate against Active Directory, but Okta is the authentication source. We'd have to dig into exactly what that means and walk you through that. There's different ways to set up Okta. There's delegation. There's a bunch of other stuff. There's still on-premise Active Directory and how that fits into the equation. So that might warrant a standalone conversation to go through the details on that. Okay, more questions. If we do not run the process to have the device join the on-prem domain, will the on-prem AD GPOs be able to be applied? You think the answer is no. You're absolutely right. The answer is no. That's the entire problem of co-management. They are not there. If we went through this fancy process and we enrolled this device, it is never going to see a GPO. It's not. It doesn't exist in the ecosystem. Now, if we brought it back in and joined it to a normal domain and so forth, went through the old-fashioned process, yes, they would be there. But in the new world where the imaginary world that exists, because not a lot of customers are doing this yet, you ship that machine directly to the user, or they went and bought it and they're enrolling it on their own, GPOs are gone. They're just missing. And they're replaced with our CSPs. And we have to be happy with the CSPs. Most customers are going to come back and say, that's not good enough. That's why we do co-management. We're going to say, fine, no problem. We're going to install that Mobileiron Bridge. And the Mobileiron Bridge is going to install our Endpoint Manager agent, and then Endpoint Manager can do whatever it wants. It can do GPOs with our Environment Manager policy configuration. So no, you can't do GPOs. That's a big gaping problem. That's why modern device management probably cannot stand on its own. Some customers are fine with that. You're a brand new startup, you got 50 users, you don't care about group policy. Most of my customers are old-fashioned. They have this huge technical debt. They're still trying to get rid of Windows XP. They can't move that fast. And so the co-management of having both models is usually the right answer. Both Microsoft and Mobileiron licenses by user. Generally speaking, yes, there are different models out there, but the most popular ones are both user-based. Can you set a host name in the autopilot process? That is a fabulous question. I don't know the answer to that. Because we absolutely know that information, and we can see what the device looks like. And if we go in here and click on devices, we can see the device model, but I don't know if we can tweak that to the device name. So I'm going to make a note of that, and then I'm going to find out. And when we send out this email to everyone as kind of a follow-up, I'll have the right answer to there. Okay, fabulous questions. I loved them all. Keep them coming. I got a couple more minutes, so I want to talk about one last thing, and that's Avanti neurons. You're going to hear a lot more about the Avanti neurons because we already talked about, hey, what about all these consoles I'm logging into? Okay, I've got the EPM console. I've got the modern device management console with Mobileiron. I've got my Active Directory console. Oh, we use VMware. I've got my VMware console. How many consoles are you at? You get paid by the console? Maybe you should renegotiate your contract that's how you should get paid because we're kind of drowning in that. We got too many different data sources. So Avanti neurons is the kind of central part of what we want to do going forward. I've got my marker. You've got all these different places of data. Active Directory, your modern device management tool, your traditional management tool, VMware, maybe you have SCCM, maybe you have Intune, maybe you have Rapid7 or whatever, keep going. You got a whole pile of stuff. Oh, you got Okta. Think about all these places of data, users, systems, configurations. You've got all of this crap in all of these different places. Not a single one of them is complete. EPM is missing server information. Active Directory is missing serial number. VMware has great server information. It doesn't know anything about printers and scanners. And the list goes on. None of them are complete. Avanti neurons, we create these fancy things called connectors. And the connectors are very, very easy to set up. Only takes about 5 minutes or so. We ingest all that information into a fancy thing called a data lake. Our data lake has all of the data, has every piece of information from all these systems. But you know what? That's interesting, but it's not really that great for an analyst. What I'm going to do is let your analysts come over here. And when they log in, it might pull in a tiny bit of Active Directory information that's about the user. It might pull in, a couple of tidbits here about the endpoint management. Might pull in something over here from SCCM or, et cetera, or over from our ISM system. We're going to present that information in a much more easy to consume format for a regular analyst. We're not going to get rid of these back-end consoles. We're not going to replace your Active Directory console. But what I'd like to be able to do is give a technician a view to log in here. Sorry, kicked us out. Let's log back in really quick. So Avanti neurons is a separate license SKU, but now I can look at all of those devices. So let me show you the connectors really quick. Here we have all the different connectors to the systems that we have. Integrating systems is usually a pretty cumbersome and difficult process. Not with us. We can go in here and say, hey, let's connect it to Azure Active Directory or regular on-premise Active Directory. I need a name. I need a domain name, a base DN, a username and password, and some data filters, how often we're going to do it, and then I hit save and go. Like I said, 5 minutes worth of setup time. Oh, you're a VMware shop. Let's pull in VMware information. Now I can pull that information in without having an agent on the device. So now I have all of my devices kind of in one aggregate view. This is a great place to park it before we send it over to something like an asset management system because it's data from all of the different systems. So, I've got servers, I've got workstations, I've got printers, I've got scanners, I've got phones. All of the information is aggregated together here. And when I pull up something like a phone, here's an Android phone that I have, I get actions around modern device management. Lock, wipe, unlock, remove device, force check-in, things like that. When I'm going backwards and I'm looking at, a Windows machine, I might have, let's look at a stone. I'll have Windows-related functions. Remote control, push out a piece of software, create an incident associated with it. Even do cool things like, run an IP config on that machine. You're not necessarily going to do that on a a regular workstation. So I've aggregated all that information together. We've even got some really cool things like our Edge Intelligence that can give you a cool map view of everything, or even say cool things like, show me logon times and show me a natural language search where it's going to show the individual pieces of information, down to even like when they're logging in, how long did that session take, what were the different steps during the logon process, or show me who is a local admin, or what the status of BitLocker is. It's actually doing a real-time query against all my devices to pull this information down. So neurons, again, is that aggregating function. Bring it all together. Give me information from more than one data source, because we all kind of agree that we're never going to have a single data source out there that gives us all of our information. So this is a great way to aggregate that. We've done a couple sessions on neurons. If you have questions or concerns about that, I can show you a lot more on that. That was just a super high level overview. Okay, a couple more questions here. In neurons, is there a way to tell what system a field has been populated by, and if the data that field differed from the record in another system? The answer is right now, no. Kind of the question behind that is we need to understand that systems might come from multiple different locations. And we can tell that by these connectors over here on the side. This machine I found in 3 different connectors: my Active Directory connector, my Endpoint Manager connector, and my Service Manager connector. If you look at the detailed view here, you can understand more about those connectors here under the Discovery metadata. However, right now, the logic on saying if we found IP address in Endpoint Manager and we found IP address in Service Manager, which one took precedent, we don't expose that out to the regular user right now. That is hidden behind the scenes. I don't know if that's ever going to be exposed. I would rather we find out why we care about that, and maybe we can create a toggle or a checkbox to change the behavior, versus having so much data and being able to try and swim through that data lake is sometimes too much information. So maybe come up with a couple of examples of what you want to do. For example, maybe you want to say, hey, it's got 3 different device names. I want to prioritize device name for when it comes in from Endpoint Manager. Let's encapsulate it down into a couple of check boxes or Booleans we could come up with that we could ask for them to add to the feature, versus saying, hey, let's expose the entire data lake and have to try and figure out how this works. Okay, but great question. All right, well, that was kind of it, everything I wanted to talk about and kind of walk you through. Remember, everything we did at an incredibly high level. We could have spent hours on all these individual functions, 2 hours on Mobileiron, 2 hours on neurons, et cetera. But I really just wanted to kind of give you a nice taste test of what it is and what's out there. So please, if you have any further questions that we weren't able to answer, please give us an email, talk to your NCSI sales rep. They can hook you up with anything. If you want to do a trial, we can set up a trial of Mobileiron and neurons very, very easily. So someone will be reaching out to you. So either wait for them to hit you up or talk to your NCSI salesperson, and we can have a trial set up for you, or we can go into more details on a personalized demo that may fit your particular use cases or things like that. But otherwise, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. I appreciate it, and have a great day. Bye.